Hi, I'm Tara Darlington from Empowering Motherhood. Now we're going through the 7 secrets of childbirth. Now the fourth secret that I want to talk to you about today, which we have touched on a tiny bit, we're going to go into more detail, is active birth and the importance of being active in your birth, your labour and your birth. So active birth is a term coined by a UK yoga teacher and birth educator, Janet Velasquez. So it refers to the importance of moving around in labour and for the woman to choose the positions that she feels she needs to be during labour and the birth, and to following her body. So if we start to look at the structure of the pelvis, the pelvic bones, there's separate pelvic bones that are held together with ligaments and tendons. So what we have is, as we get more pregnant through the pregnancy and then into the labour, more hormones. Part of those hormones are relaxins, which soften these elastic bands that have been normally hold your pelvis together quite strongly. Some of you might be already feeling that, it's the pregnancy waddle starts to come about, where you start feeling that looseness in the pelvis. Now this serves a couple of purposes. As you give your body what it needs and give it the movement, because the pelvic bones become mobile, it helps to allow the baby to come into the optimal position for the birth. It helps to bring the baby's head down onto the cervix, which is the bottom of the uterus, and it helps to facilitate an easier, safer birth. So as we move around in different positions, a lot of women will naturally rock and sway in labour and want to be in a position for a certain amount of time, half an hour or a few hours, and then want to change positions. As we're doing this, we're allowing space for the baby to come down. That movement facilitates the baby to come into the best position. We're also bringing the baby's head firmly onto the cervix, which also helps to release more hormones and helps with the birthing process. What we want to do as well is allow, the pelvis needs to open for the birth to allow the baby to come down. Now you've probably heard discussions around the size of a woman's pelvis. There's a lot of fear created around this, but what's actually more important is how many relaxants she has. So the size of your pelvis starts to become a lot less important when you start to look at how relaxed you are, how safe and secure you feel, and how much movement you're giving your body, so that you do get more relaxants and you do get more mobility in the pelvis for the baby to come down into the best position. Now the next thing about active birth is about the woman being upright, often leaning forward in some sort of version of a standing squat or kneeling over something, because we want to use gravity. Now gravity is going to help the baby come onto the cervix, as we just discussed before, and it's also, you want to work with gravity for the labour rather than against it. So the other thing that is really important to start to think about, if we're lying on our back, as we see in TV a lot of the time, and I don't know any woman as yet that has chosen to lie on her back in labour. I'm sure it does happen, but it's very rare that a woman will actually choose to lie on her back in labour. You might see a woman lying on her side or moving around on hands and knees, but rarely will you see a woman choosing to lie on her back in labour, and very, very rarely for the birth. Yet this is what we see in the media, so you can see how we're getting this conflicting information. So as the woman, when you're lying on your back, your pelvis is the most closed it can be. It's the smallest it can be. It's immobile. There's no room for it to move around and allow the baby to come into the right position. And you're also working against gravity with the baby. So there's so much about lying on your back that works against labour, and so much about following that instinct, that natural movement, the restlessness in labour that is going to support the labour process. So also when we're lying on our back, there's a major artery that runs up along near the spine, and so the baby can press on that and reduce the oxygen flow to the uterus and to the baby. So what we see when we have this is sometimes babies going into fetal distress because they're not getting enough oxygen. So for all intensive purposes, it makes no sense at all for a woman to be on her back in labour, and it makes every bit of sense for her to follow her body, give her body what it needs, turn inward, listen to the baby, listen to her body, and just move around as she feels she needs to. So there's another element that comes into active birth and that position for labour, which is that women, when you're, if you're lying on your back, the baby's head, when it's being born, is pressing unnecessarily into the perineum. Okay, so when a woman is upright and forward and the pelvis is open, and as the baby's being born, the perineum is the muscle tissue between the vagina and the anus. So in the positions in active birth, you'll find that as the baby's being born, the perineum just stretches open, just like when you yawn. However, when a woman's on her back, that's when you'll often find a more serious tear in the perineum, or a need for an assisted delivery because everything's working against you instead of supporting the birthing process. So the other thing that is really important to think about with active labour is that the long-term consequences of intervention. So we're doing all of this because we want to minimise risk. We want to give the body what it needs to birth more easily and safer for the mother and for the baby. So with a complicated labour, when a mother's inhibited in labour and you're inhibiting the birthing process, you're also creating higher risks. So if you have higher risks of a medicalised birth, of medical intervention. So this could be an episiotomy where they cut the perineum. This could be pain relief drugs, or some sort of different methods, different drugs to augment the labour if the labour's a bit slow or the mother's exhausted. It can also mean surgical or assisted delivery with forceps or ventouse. The ventouse is like the suction cup, or even caesarean. So these things carry higher risks. And as you, if women have more intervention in their labour, they have a medicalised birth, they have a 3rd or 4th degree tear, they've had forceps or a caesarean, say, then they become higher risk for their next labour. Okay, so you really want to do everything that you can to minimise your risks of a medicalised birth in your first labour, or whichever labour that you're in, because you then become higher risk for your subsequent pregnancies and births. And we want to avoid that if we can. Now, the other long-term effect that people haven't really thought of with intervention, if there is any damage or long-term consequences from the intervention, then you also have, you can have long-term obstetric problems or issues to deal with. So, for example, if you have a caesarean and there's any complications from that, then that could be long-term complications that you then have to deal with. So to minimise intervention in labour and birth, we really need to start with minimising intervention with the first labour if we can. If you've already had a labour with medical intervention, there's no reason why you can't, start where you are now. And I'm sure that you've learned a lot from your previous birth, and that's probably why you're sitting here watching this video. So let's just go over active birth for a moment. So if we think about the structure of the pelvis, if we think about what the baby and the body need in order to birth more easily and birth safely for the mother and the baby, we need movement. We need to give the body what it needs to birth easily. That movement is absolutely important. That restlessness, swaying, rocking, changing positions from one position to another, from one room to another. It's absolutely vital because it helps the mother to stay centered. It helps the baby come into the best position possible for a straightforward, easy and safe birth for the mother and the baby. We want to use gravity, not work against gravity, so that we can have an easier delivery and that we minimize the risk to the perineum. And with all of this, we're minimizing the risks of medical intervention or a medicalized birth. And a medicalized birth puts you in a higher risk for your next birth. A medicalized birth can also increase the risk of obstetric problems for you, short-term and long-term. There's a lot of longer-term social implications of having a natural birth or an active birth and having unnecessary intervention. And it can lead right through into different areas of people's lives. And we talked about it earlier about their bonding with the baby, the relationship. So when birth is interrupted, we interrupt the hormones, we interrupt the normal process that will normally support the mother right through. So if there is intervention required, we're not against intervention. We just want to minimize the need for intervention by giving the mother and her body what it needs, allowing the mother to give her body what it needs to birth more intuitively and, as I've said a few times now, safely for her and the baby. So I want you to go back to your birth plan, your birth vision, and start to think about these things and how you might implement them into a birth plan. Because what you're wanting to do is I want you to start to see yourself in labour at home, in these positions. Where do you think you might feel comfortable labouring, given that we've spoken about safety, we've spoken about security, we've spoken about the need to create the environment, and also now looking at this movement that's needed for women in order for her to give her body what it needs. So go and add those things to your birth plan, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.